When Germany flew America's best fighter, the untold story. The metallic shriek of a dying Merlin engine cut through the morning air over northern France, June 6, 1944. Lieutenant Thomas Fraser, 334th Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Group, fought his damaged P-51 Mustang through the clouds, trailing smoke like a funeral shroud. Somewhere below, the largest invasion in human history churned forward on blood-soaked beaches. But Fraser's war had just taken a different turn. His fighter, serial number 4324825, nicknamed Jerry, struck French soil hard, and Fraser survived. Barely. What he couldn't know, crawling from his wrecked cockpit into German hands, was that his aircraft was about to betray every secret American engineers had poured into it, and in doing so, force some of Germany's most experienced pilots to confront a truth their commanders had desperately tried to conceal. They were flying obsolete aircraft against a technologically superior enemy, and no amount of courage or skill could overcome that fundamental reality. The wreckage lay in that field for only hours before German salvage teams arrived with the efficiency of undertakers. These weren't amateurs picking through debris, they were specialists who had perfected the grim art of harvesting Allied aircraft across occupied Europe, turning crashes into intelligence gold mines. They examined Fraser's Mustang with professional detachment, noting every detail, every intact component, calculating whether this particular prize could be resurrected. The decision came quickly. Despite battle damage and the violent impact, the airframe remained largely whole. This one would fly again, but under a different flag. And what it would reveal about American capabilities would shake German confidence far more than any propaganda broadcast ever could. Within days, the P-51 was loaded onto specialized transport, beginning a journey that would take it deep into the heart of the Reich, to a place where uncomfortable truths were systematically uncovered and impossible to ignore. Rechlin Testing Center, about 100 kilometers northwest of Berlin, had become the Luftwaffe's nerve center for understanding what they were really up against. The facility sprawled across the landscape near Lake Müritz, its runways and workshops dedicated to a single mission: rip apart every assumption about Allied aircraft and replace comfortable lies with quantifiable data. German technicians who worked there possessed remarkable skill. They had to, given what they were asked to accomplish, taking crashed enemy aircraft built to specifications they'd never seen, using materials they didn't have access to, with no manuals and no genuine spare parts. They were expected to make these machines airworthy again. It was mechanical necromancy, and they'd gotten disturbingly good at it. Fraser's Mustang arrived as a patient on death's door, but the Germans had become expert surgeons, cannibalizing components from other wrecks scattered across their shrinking empire, matching parts with the eye of craftsmen who understood they were assembling not just a functional aircraft, but evidence that would be used to prosecute a case against their own leadership's assurances. The repair process revealed something that would become increasingly apparent to German engineers. American manufacturing philosophy operated on fundamentally different principles than their own. Every component they examined spoke to design choices that prioritized reliability and ease of production over absolute theoretical performance. The Packard V1650-3 Merlin engine, a licensed copy of the British Rolls-Royce design but built in American factories, showed manufacturing tolerances and material quality that German engineers could only envy by late 1944. Its two-stage, two-speed supercharger represented sophisticated engineering that delivered sustained, high-altitude performance, exactly what German inline engines lacked as they gasped for air above 25,000 feet. German technicians noted this with the clinical detachment of doctors diagnosing a terminal illness. They understood what this engine meant tactically. American fighters could escort bombers at altitudes where German interceptors struggled to even reach combat power, much less fight effectively. The wing design drew particular scrutiny, its NACA laminar flow airfoil promising exceptional aerodynamic efficiency, though the Germans correctly surmised that achieving true laminar flow in operational conditions remained elusive due to rivets, paint, and surface imperfections. Still, the wing performed remarkably across a broad speed range, maintaining effectiveness whether crawling through landing approaches or screaming through high-speed combat maneuvers. As German mechanics worked to resurrect Fraser's fighter, painting it in Luftwaffe markings with bright RLM-04 yellow identification paint slathered across tail and undersides, a parallel story was unfolding across German-occupied territory. The Luftwaffe faced a crisis that went beyond individual aircraft performance. They were being systematically overwhelmed by an enemy whose industrial capacity seemed nearly limitless. American bomber formations penetrated deeper into the Reich monthly, protected by escorts whose true capabilities remained frustratingly unclear from fragmentary combat reports that emerged from the chaos of dogfights 30,000 feet above Germany. Pilots returning from missions reported contradictory experiences with American fighters, some claiming dominance, others describing desperate escapes from aircraft that simply refused to be caught or shaken. These conflicting accounts reflected the confusion inherent in aerial combat, where perception warps under stress and accurate assessment becomes nearly impossible. What German commanders needed wasn't more combat reports, they needed systematic evaluation under controlled conditions, and they needed pilots to experience Allied aircraft capabilities directly, through their own hands on the controls, rather than through second-hand accounts filtered through the fog of war. That's where Hauptmann Theodor Rosarius entered the story, an experienced Luftwaffe officer who understood that knowledge was becoming the scarcest resource in Germany's arsenal. In 1943, following orders from General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, Rosarius formed what would become legendary as the Wanderzirkus Rosarius, officially the second Staffel of the Versuchsverband Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, but known more colloquially as Rosarius's traveling circus. The name fit perfectly, because what Rosarius organized was indeed a spectacle, though one designed to educate rather than entertain. His unit received every repairable captured Allied aircraft German salvage teams could recover, and rather than keeping these machines locked away at secure testing facilities, Rosarius took them on the road, visiting operational Luftwaffe fighter bases across Germany and occupied territories, allowing frontline pilots to examine enemy aircraft up close, watch them perform in flight demonstrations, and in carefully selected cases, fly against them in mock combat that revealed truths no amount of briefing could convey. The concept addressed a fundamental flaw in German pilot training. Most pilots trained exclusively against their own aircraft types, learning tactics optimized for fighting opponents who flew like Germans in German machines using German tactical doctrines. This created dangerous blind spots when engaging Allied pilots whose aircraft possessed markedly different performance characteristics and whose training emphasized specific tactical approaches German pilots never encountered in training. By the time Fraser's P-51, now coded T9 plus HK, emerged from Rechlin's workshops in late summer 1944, it represented something more than just another captured aircraft added to the Wanderzirkus inventory. This Mustang arrived at a critical moment when the air war's trajectory had become unmistakable to anyone willing to see clearly. Germany was losing, not just battles, but the industrial war of attrition that would ultimately decide everything. American factories were producing fighters in numbers that seemed almost fictional to German commanders accustomed to their own constrained production figures. But numbers alone didn't tell the complete story. Truly terrified German leadership, when they allowed themselves to confront reality, was that American aircraft weren't crude, mass-produced machines, trading quality for quantity. They were sophisticated, well-engineered weapons that matched or exceeded German designs in the performance categories that mattered strategically. The Mustang epitomized this uncomfortable reality, and German test pilots were about to discover exactly how uncomfortable that reality felt. The first German test pilot to strap into Fraser's Mustang approached the aircraft with professional curiosity, mixed with skepticism cultivated by years of official information portraying American aircraft as adequate but unexceptional. Capable machines, certainly, but nothing that should concern pilots flying the latest Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf fighters. That skepticism began dissolving the moment he settled into the cockpit. The interior space surprised him immediately. Coming from the cramped confines of a BF-109 where every control felt just slightly out of comfortable reach, the Mustang's cockpit seemed almost luxurious. Controls fell naturally underhand, instruments grouped logically by function, gauges clearly marked and easy to read even at a glance. The seat actually provided genuine comfort, a consideration that seemed almost frivolous until you understood that these aircraft flew missions lasting 8 hours or more, and pilot fatigue directly impacted combat effectiveness and decision-making. Even the visibility exceeded expectations, despite the P-51B's razorback canopy configuration with its heavy framing. It still offered better sight lines than the brutally restricted view from a BF-109 cockpit, particularly rearward, where German pilots flew with a constant vulnerability to attacks they couldn't see developing. But the true revelation came when that test pilot advanced the throttle and felt over 1,400 horsepower surge through the airframe. The Mustang accelerated down Rechlin's runway with authority, the four-bladed Hamilton Standard propeller clawing efficiently through air, converting raw power into forward motion with impressive effectiveness. The takeoff roll was noticeably shorter than expected for an aircraft of this weight, testament to both engine power and aerodynamic efficiency. Then the wheels left concrete, and the Mustang climbed into German sky, and everything German pilots thought they understood about American fighter design began to unravel. The flight controls responded with a harmony that seemed almost unreal. Aileron, elevator, and rudder forces perfectly balanced across the entire speed envelope, not too heavy, not too light, responding crisply to inputs without any tendency toward oversensitivity or delayed reaction. The aircraft felt stable and yet responsive, a combination that's remarkably difficult to achieve in fighter design. German test pilots systematically worked through evaluation protocols, pushing the Mustang through maneuvers designed to reveal both capabilities and limitations. And what they discovered profoundly troubled them because it contradicted years of reassurance from leadership about relative capabilities. The P-51's climb performance immediately stood out as superior to anything Germany had in operational service. The Mustang maintained excellent climb rates to altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet, where its two-stage supercharged Merlin continued producing robust power even as the air grew thin and cold. German fighters equipped with single-stage superchargers struggled increasingly at these altitudes, their engines laboring to breathe, power dropping off dramatically, leaving pilots feeling as though they were hanging by their propellers, barely maintaining altitude, certainly not capable of aggressive maneuvering or sustained combat. This altitude performance gap had immediate tactical implications that weren't lost on German pilots or commanders who understood what it meant. American bomber formations typically operated between 25,000 and 30,000 feet, where defensive gunner fire remained effective, but the air was thin enough to severely degrade the performance of interceptors trying to attack them. The Mustang could not only reach these altitudes easily, but could fight there effectively, maintaining speed advantage and maneuverability.
German interceptors gasped and struggled, their engines producing perhaps 70% of rated power if pilots were lucky, leaving them vulnerable to escorts who retained full capability. Speed trials conducted under controlled conditions at various altitudes confirmed what combat pilots had been reporting with increasing urgency. The Mustang was simply faster than anything Germany had flying. At optimal altitude with the engine at military power settings, the P-51B could achieve approximately 440 miles per hour, significantly faster than the BF-109G's roughly 386 miles per hour, or the FW-190A's approximately 408 miles per hour when measured under comparable conditions. This wasn't a marginal advantage, this was a fundamental tactical game changer because it meant Mustang pilots could dictate engagement terms according to their advantage. If the tactical situation favored attack, American pilots could pursue fleeing German fighters who lacked the speed to escape. If circumstances turned unfavorable, Mustang pilots could simply accelerate away from German fighters that couldn't catch them, refusing combat until conditions improved. German pilots discovered through systematic testing and mock combat that they couldn't force engagement on a Mustang whose pilot recognized an unfavorable situation and chose to disengage. This completely undermined German tactical flexibility and forced German fighters into a reactive posture where they could only engage when American pilots permitted it. The wing design contributed significantly to the Mustang's capabilities, its NACA laminar flow airfoil generating substantial lift with minimal drag compared to conventional airfoils. While German engineers correctly noted that achieving true laminar flow in operational conditions remained practically impossible due to surface imperfections, manufacturing tolerances, rivets, and paint, the wing nonetheless performed exceptionally well across a remarkably broad speed range. It maintained effectiveness during relatively slow landing approaches, through medium-speed combat maneuvering, and up through high-speed dives, providing consistent, predictable handling characteristics that reduced pilot workload and enhanced combat effectiveness. German test pilots noted this broad speed range effectiveness with particular interest because their own fighters tended toward more specialized performance profiles, excellent in certain regimes but compromised in others. The Mustang seemed to do everything well enough, sacrificing absolute peak performance in any single area to achieve overall effectiveness across all mission phases. Dive performance revealed yet another area where the Mustang demonstrated clear superiority. The aircraft could dive at very high speeds without encountering the severe control stiffening that plagued many fighters approaching or exceeding maximum design speeds. Pilots could pull out of steep, high-speed dives without requiring excessive physical effort or fighting against controls that had effectively locked up, and the airframe remained stable throughout without tendency toward dangerous flutter or buffeting. This capability directly countered a primary German tactical doctrine: diving attacks from altitude to build speed and energy before pulling back up. German pilots had relied on this tactic to attack bomber formations and enemy fighters, but if the Mustang could follow them through high-speed dives while maintaining full control authority, that tactical advantage evaporated. German fighters couldn't escape by diving anymore because the Mustang would simply follow them down and emerge from the dive with equal or better energy state. Turn performance presented a more nuanced picture that required careful analysis to understand properly. In sustained, level turning fights at moderate speeds, the Mustang couldn't match the Bf-109's turn rate, particularly since the German fighter benefited from leading-edge slats that automatically deployed during high angle of attack maneuvering, delaying wing stall and enabling tighter sustained turns. The lighter, more compact Bf-109 held a measurable advantage in pure horizontal turning ability at lower and medium altitudes. But German test pilots discovered through mock combat that this advantage proved largely theoretical because Mustang pilots who understood energy management techniques and properly utilized their aircraft's superior speed and climb performance could avoid sustained turning engagements entirely. The Mustang excelled at converting speed to altitude and altitude back to speed efficiently, maintaining energy state throughout combat maneuvering. This allowed Mustang pilots to engage when advantageous and disengage when threatened, forcing combat on their terms rather than accepting the enemy's preferred combat geometry. A Mustang pilot who wanted to avoid a turning fight simply extended away using superior speed, then reversed back with renewed energy advantage when conditions favored attack. The structural strength and robust construction philosophy of the P-51 impressed German engineers who examined the airframe in systematic detail. The aircraft was substantially built with significant safety margins engineered into critical structural components throughout. This robust construction contrasted markedly with German design approaches that often pushed structural limits to absolute minimums, pursuing weight reduction and maximum performance. The Mustang could sustain significant battle damage that would have destroyed lighter German aircraft and still successfully return to base, a capability that translated directly into pilot survival rates and aircraft availability for subsequent missions. American engineering philosophy clearly emphasized survivability and maintainability, accepting somewhat higher empty weight in exchange for durability that kept aircraft and pilots in combat longer. This design philosophy reflected different priorities. American designers optimized for sustained operations with acceptable losses rather than maximum theoretical performance regardless of practical sustainability. But nothing troubled German pilots and commanders more than the Mustang's range capabilities, which seemed almost incredible to men accustomed to fuel tanks barely sufficient for 90-minute missions. The P-51B carried substantially more internal fuel than German fighters, and its aerodynamically efficient design converted that fuel capacity into truly extraordinary range.
With external drop tanks attached under the wings, the Mustang could fly missions exceeding 8 hours duration, covering operational distances that German pilots found nearly impossible to comprehend. Early in the war, German fighters had simply waited until shorter-range Allied escorts reached fuel limits and turned back toward bases, then attacked unprotected bombers during the most dangerous mission segments deep in German territory. The Mustang completely eliminated this tactical window. American escorts could now accompany bombers throughout entire missions, England to targets deep in Germany and back to England, never leaving bomber formations vulnerable. The strategic implications were profound and deeply troubling to Luftwaffe commanders who understood that German fighters now had to fight through escort screens throughout every bombing mission, rather than finding windows of bomber vulnerability. Every interception sortie now featured fighter escort throughout, dramatically increasing risk German pilots faced when attempting to reach bombers. As Fraser's P-51, painted in German markings and bearing the code T9+HK, prepared to join the Wanderzirkus Rosarius for its traveling demonstration tour, the captured Mustang represented more than just technical intelligence. It embodied physical proof that challenged fundamental assumptions about relative national capabilities. Official German information had consistently portrayed Americans as capable of producing simple, rugged equipment in vast quantities, but fundamentally incapable of sophisticated design requiring engineering excellence. German pilots who'd believed these comfortable assurances were about to confront direct evidence that the narrative that it
was propaganda disconnected from reality, and that confrontation would force many to question everything they'd been told about the war's trajectory. The Wanderzirkus Rosarius took Fraser's Mustang on an extensive tour across Germany during late 1944, visiting numerous Luftwaffe fighter bases where frontline squadrons were based. At each stop, the program followed a carefully structured demonstration designed to maximize educational impact. The day typically began with captured aircraft taxiing past assembled German pilots and ground personnel, creating surreal scenes as enemy machines bearing German markings and bright yellow identification paint moved among German fighters. Seeing these aircraft up close had substantial psychological impact beyond any verbal briefing, making the enemy tangible and immediate rather than abstract. The P-51's sleek lines and substantial size surprised many German pilots who'd formed mental images based on fragmented combat glimpses. Seeing it stationary on the ground, examining construction details, running hands over smooth skin, and noting build quality, these direct experiences forced pilots to confront the reality of what they faced in combat skies. Flight demonstrations came next, with experienced German test pilots flying captured aircraft through carefully choreographed routines designed to showcase specific performance capabilities in ways far more effective than written reports or technical briefings could achieve. For Mustang demonstrations, test pilots performed high-speed passes at low altitude to dramatically display the aircraft's significant speed advantage over German types. They executed climbing maneuvers to altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet, demonstrating the remarkable climb performance and high-altitude capability enabled by the two-stage supercharged engine. They showed off the P-51's excellent roll rate through series of crisp aileron rolls that illustrated how quickly the aircraft could change direction in combat. Mock dogfights against German fighters would follow, illustrating both Mustang's strengths and the increasingly limited circumstances under which German fighters retained exploitable advantages. These weren't scripted shows designed to reassure. They were honest demonstrations that revealed uncomfortable tactical realities, and pilots watching from the ground understood exactly what they were seeing. After the flying display concluded, pilots and ground personnel could approach the aircraft on the ground, examine it closely, inspect cockpit layout and instrument panels, peer into wheel wells and access panels, and ask detailed questions of test pilots who possessed extensive experience flying the captured machine. These hands-on educational sessions proved invaluable for demystifying enemy aircraft and providing concrete, tangible understanding of what German pilots would face in actual combat operations. Pilots could sit in the cockpit, feel control spacing, understand sight pictures, and grasp exactly what Mustang pilots experienced,
perspective that transformed abstract threat into immediate comprehension. Ground crews examined construction techniques, materials, and maintenance access, comparing American approaches to German methods, and often finding themselves impressed by thoughtful design details that simplified maintenance and improved reliability. The most valuable component of these base visits involved mock combat sessions where captured Allied fighters engaged German fighters in carefully controlled simulated combat under observation. Selected experienced German pilots flew their own operational aircraft against captured types, experiencing firsthand how Allied fighters handled in dynamic combat situations and learning what tactics worked and what proved ineffective against specific aircraft. Mock combat sessions stripped away all theoretical discussion and forced direct confrontation with tactical realities. One such demonstration took place at a base hosting Jagdgeschwader 1 during late 1944 as Allied bombing operations intensified and German losses mounted steadily. The base commander arranged for several of his most experienced pilots to fly mock engagements against the captured Mustang,
gaining practical knowledge they could pass to squadron mates. The German test pilot flying the P-51 demonstrated tactics American pilots typically employed in actual combat, using the Mustang's clear advantages in speed and climb performance to maintain energy throughout engagement while avoiding situations where the Mustang's lesser turn performance became significant disadvantage. German pilots flying Bf-109Gs and FW-190As attempted to engage the Mustang using standard Luftwaffe tactics that had proven effective against earlier Allied fighters. They quickly discovered the extreme difficulty of successfully engaging a Mustang whose pilot understood and properly utilized energy management techniques and aircraft performance advantages. When German pilots pursued aggressively, the Mustang simply accelerated away, opening distance faster than pursuing German fighters could close it. When German pilots attempted climbing to gain advantageous position above the Mustang for diving attacks, the P-51 outclimbed them, reaching superior altitude first and reversing the tactical situation. When German pilots tried forcing sustained turning fights where the Bf-109's superior turn performance should have provided advantage, the Mustang pilot refused engagement by extending away using superior speed, then reversing back into engagement with renewed energy advantage when conditions favored attack. The mock combat sessions proved sobering for German pilots who had believed or hoped their aircraft and established tactics remained reasonably competitive with Allied fighters despite the deteriorating strategic situation. Watching from the ground, observing the demonstration unfold, German pilots experienced a revelation that no amount of official briefing could have conveyed. They could see with absolute clarity that Mustang pilots possessed decisive tactical advantages at high altitudes where bomber escort combat typically occurred. Every performance category that mattered strategically favored the American fighter: speed, range, high-altitude performance, and overall numbers. German pilots understood intellectually that engaging Mustangs at altitude meant fighting at severe disadvantage, yet declining to engage meant allowing American bombers to strike targets unopposed, accelerating Germany's military and industrial collapse. Neither option offered acceptable outcomes from a professional military perspective, yet these were the stark choices German fighter pilots faced daily during the war's final year. The knowledge gained from these demonstrations provided tactical intelligence about optimal engagement parameters and exploitable weaknesses, but this knowledge couldn't overcome fundamental disadvantages in aircraft performance, numerical superiority, inadequate training due to fuel shortages, and chronic shortages of spare parts and experienced maintenance personnel. This pattern of revelation repeated itself across numerous Luftwaffe bases where the Wanderzirkus Rosarius conducted demonstrations throughout late 1944 and into 1945. German pilots received official assurances about continuing superiority or at least competitive parity of their aircraft during pre-demonstration briefings, then experienced actual flight demonstrations that directly contradicted those optimistic assessments. The captured aircraft demonstrations provided concrete, undeniable evidence that German fighters faced formidable opponents whose capabilities significantly exceeded what propaganda and official communications suggested. Professional pilots developed grudging respect for American engineering achievements despite their position as enemies, recognizing through direct experience that the Mustang represented coherent, well-integrated design that intelligently prioritized characteristics most valuable for its intended strategic mission of long-range bomber escort.
Meticulous detail, studying construction methods, and attempting to understand precisely how American designers achieved such aerodynamically efficient performance. They analyzed the Packard V1653 Merlin engine with great interest, noting its sophisticated two-stage supercharger system with intercooler that enabled impressive high-altitude performance. The fuel system received careful attention as engineers attempted to understand how American designers achieved such remarkable range. German engineers noted repeatedly the consistently high quality of materials used throughout the aircraft. American access to strategic materials like high-grade aluminum alloys, specialized steels, and reliable rubber compounds allowed designers to create structures that effectively combine strength with acceptable weight while maintaining production efficiency. Germany faced increasingly severe material shortages by 1944, forcing use of substitute materials that often proved inferior in strength, durability, or manufacturing characteristics. The investigation of captured Mustangs revealed sophisticated manufacturing techniques that enabled true mass production without significantly compromising quality standards. American factories produced P-51s using highly developed assembly line methods that maintained remarkably tight tolerances and consistent quality across thousands of individual aircraft. German production had become increasingly reliant on dispersed manufacturing in smaller facilities scattered across the country to avoid concentrated bombing targets, sometimes using inadequately trained forced labor, resulting in inconsistent quality, reduced production efficiency, and increasing maintenance problems with operational aircraft. By late 1944, American factories were producing approximately 500 P-51s monthly, and this figure would climb even higher, reaching 881 aircraft monthly by January 1945 at peak production, output exceeding more than double the combined production rate of all German single-engine fighter types. Moreover, these Mustangs were equipped with reliable engines built to consistent quality standards, sophisticated and accurate instruments, and radio equipment that actually worked consistently and reliably, unlike the often unreliable and poorly manufactured equipment in late-war German fighters. American pilots flew aircraft that had been properly maintained by well-trained ground crews with adequate supplies of genuine spare parts, proper tools, and technical manuals, while German forces struggled with increasingly severe maintenance challenges created by part shortages, substitute materials, undertrained or forced labor personnel, and dispersed maintenance facilities.
The Wanderzirkus Rosarius demonstrations revealed these harsh realities directly to German pilots before they encountered them in actual combat, where stakes were life and death. While this advanced preparation theoretically improved their chances of survival by providing realistic understanding of what they would face, it simultaneously made painfully clear the deteriorating situation German forces faced across all dimensions of the air war. Pilots who flew the captured Mustang or observed demonstration flights understood with uncomfortable clarity that they would confront opponents with significant and fundamental performance advantages in the specific areas that mattered most: speed, range, high-altitude capability, and overall numbers. This knowledge, while possessing some tactical value, contributed substantially to severe psychological pressure German pilots experienced during late 1944 and early 1945 as strategic reality became impossible to ignore. The psychological impact on German pilots, who thoroughly understood through direct experience the performance gap they faced, cannot be overstated or dismissed as mere morale problems. These men had entered the war confident in their superior training, capabilities of their aircraft, and effectiveness of their tactical doctrines. By late 1944, extensive combat experience
and direct exposure to captured Allied aircraft through programs like the Wanderzirkus Rosarius had systematically eroded that confidence. They recognized with painful clarity that they fought opponents who possessed decisive advantages in aircraft performance, overwhelming numerical superiority, better logistics support, more thorough training, and superior intelligence. Flying combat missions under these conditions required extraordinary courage that bordered on fatalism and acceptance of likely death or severe injury. Former Luftwaffe pilot accounts and post-war interviews from this period frequently describe the hopeless feeling of watching American fighter formations appear on the horizon and knowing intellectually that those escorts could not be avoided through any tactical maneuver and could not be outrun by any German fighter in operational service. German pilots understood that engaging Mustangs at high altitude meant fighting at severe disadvantage in every performance category that mattered. Declining to engage meant allowing American bombers to strike targets unopposed, accelerating Germany's collapse. Neither option offered acceptable outcomes, yet these were the choices faced daily. The experience of German test pilots confronting the Mustang's capabilities and coming to terms with American engineering achievement paralleled broader German military experience during World War II's latter stages across all theaters and services. Initial confidence in German technological superiority and tactical innovation gradually gave way to recognition that Allied forces possessed decisive advantages in multiple critical areas: vast industrial capacity, access to strategic resources, enormous manpower reserves, and increasingly sophisticated technological capabilities that matched or exceeded German achievements. The Mustang represented one particularly visible manifestation of these Allied advantages. American designers created an aircraft that excelled at its intended strategic mission of long-range bomber escort. American industry produced it in enormous numbers with consistent quality despite design complexity. American training programs prepared pilots thoroughly to extract maximum performance from the aircraft in combat. German forces could study, analyze, and appreciate these advantages through programs like the Wanderzirkus Rosarius without being able to replicate or effectively counter them given strategic and material constraints they faced. The technical sophistication of the P-51 Mustang challenged and ultimately demolished German assumptions about American engineering capabilities that had been carefully cultivated by propaganda. The strategic air campaign over Germany succeeded in large part specifically because of the P-51 Mustang's unique combination of capabilities that other aircraft could not match. Long-range
bomber escort deep into Germany remained operationally infeasible until the Mustang arrived in substantial quantities during early 1944 and began flying operational missions. Previous Allied escort fighters like the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and Lockheed P-38 Lightning, despite their considerable capabilities in other areas, possessed insufficient range to accompany heavy bombers throughout complete missions to targets deep inside Germany and back to bases in England. This critical limitation allowed German fighters to simply wait until escorts reached fuel limits and turned back before attacking bomber formations during the most dangerous mission portions. The result was unsustainable bomber losses that forced suspension of deep penetration raids. The Mustang fundamentally transformed bomber escort operations by providing continuous, effective fighter coverage throughout entire missions, regardless of target distance. German fighters could no longer find extended periods when bombers flew without protective escorts. This operational reality forced German pilots to engage American fighters directly rather than simply attacking bombers, dramatically increasing risk on every interception mission. Combined with growing Allied numerical superiority and declining German pilot quality due to training time reductions, Mustang escorts made bomber operations over Germany operationally sustainable for the Allies, while German interception attempts became increasingly costly, ineffective, and ultimately futile.
Germany initiated several ambitious fighter development programs during 1944 specifically intended to counter Allied air superiority through advanced technology. The Focke-Wulf F-190D with inline engine for improved high-altitude performance, the Focke-Wulf Ta-152 specialized high-altitude fighter, and various revolutionary jet and rocket-powered designs. These programs reflected clear recognition among German designers and military leaders that existing German fighters like the Bf-109G and FW-190A could not effectively counter advanced Allied aircraft like the P-51 Mustang, given performance gaps in critical areas. However, severe material shortages, production delays caused by Allied bombing and resource constraints, and the rapidly deteriorating overall war situation prevented these advanced designs from entering operational service in numbers sufficient to influence strategic outcomes or reverse Allied air superiority. The captured Mustang, designated T9+HK, served with the Wanderzirkus Rosarius until December 10, 1944, when the aircraft and its pilot, Oberleutnant Leuchens, were lost. Historical records don't definitively specify whether the aircraft crashed during a demonstration flight, was destroyed on the ground during an Allied air raid, or fell victim to other wartime circumstances. By that point, the aircraft had traveled extensively across Germany, visiting numerous Luftwaffe bases and providing direct hands-on education to hundreds of German pilots who gained invaluable first-hand knowledge of American aircraft capabilities that no briefing document could convey. Other captured Mustangs served similar evaluation and demonstration roles for the Luftwaffe during this period, with German records indicating that at least 2 P-51s definitely operated with the Wanderzirkus Rosarius at various times during 1944 and early 1945. Documentation indicates that one captured P-51B was used at Neuruppin Airfield, located approximately 60 kilometers northwest of Berlin, to train Hungarian fighter pilots on effective tactics for using their Focke-Wulf F-190As against American Mustangs. This transfer of tactical knowledge to German allies reflected recognition that the Mustang represented a significant and growing threat, requiring specialized counter-tactics that needed to be disseminated widely among all Axis forces. The training emphasized identifying and exploiting the limited areas where German and Hungarian fighters retained advantages, such as sustained turn performance at lower speeds and altitudes, while studiously avoiding situations that played directly to the Mustang's overwhelming strengths in speed, climb rate, and high-altitude performance. But even this tactical knowledge proved increasingly theoretical as the war situation deteriorated. Understanding how to fight a Mustang effectively required circumstances that allowed pilots to choose when and where to engage, and by late 1944, German pilots rarely enjoyed such luxury. The broader implications of German pilots directly experiencing and thoroughly understanding superior American fighters extended well beyond immediate tactical considerations. The Mustang represented tangible, undeniable evidence that American industrial and engineering capabilities equaled or exceeded German achievements in critical areas, contradicting years of propaganda about American industrial and technical inferiority. This uncomfortable realization challenged fundamental assumptions about relative national capabilities and contributed significantly to declining morale among German pilots who increasingly understood they fought at severe and growing disadvantage that no amount of skill, courage, or tactical cleverness could fully overcome. The Mustang's range capabilities particularly troubled German commanders because they clearly recognized the decisive strategic implications. The bomber war over Germany, which had seemed potentially containable when Allied escorts possessed limited range and had to turn back before reaching deep targets, became effectively unstoppable once Mustangs could provide continuous escort coverage throughout entire missions. Walter Dahl, who commanded fighter units during 1944, later wrote about Wanderzirkus Rosarius' visits to his bases in his memoir, though historians note his accounts must be treated cautiously due to documented reliability issues throughout his writing. He described how captured American fighters would arrive along with captured heavy bombers, creating unusual and somewhat surreal scenes where enemy aircraft parked peacefully alongside German machines while pilots examined them closely. Formation leaders received opportunities to fly captured American aircraft in controlled mock combat, allowing them to understand Allied aircraft characteristics through direct personal experience, rather than relying solely on second-hand reports and official briefings. Dahl emphasized the substantial value of this training, noting that familiarity with enemy aircraft capabilities represented a factor not to be underestimated in aerial combat, where split-second decisions often determined survival. Following these demonstration sessions, flight leaders would conduct detailed training lectures with their squadron members, passing along specific recommendations and tactical insights based on their personal observations and direct experience flying Allied aircraft. This systematic knowledge transfer helped prepare German pilots for combat encounters with more realistic understanding of both Allied strengths and the increasingly limited circumstances under which German fighters retained exploitable advantages. Yet the program achieved decidedly mixed results by late 1944 as Germany's strategic situation deteriorated across all fronts. While demonstrations unquestionably provided valuable tactical intelligence and improved German pilot understanding of Allied aircraft capabilities, this knowledge could not overcome the fundamental and growing disadvantages German forces faced. The Luftwaffe suffered from chronic and worsening fuel shortages that severely limited flight training hours for new pilots, resulting in inadequately prepared pilots being sent into combat with minimal experience. Experienced pilots who understood through hard-won combat experience how to fight effectively against aircraft like the P-51 were increasingly rare, lost to relentless attrition during the brutal air combat of 1944 that saw German fighter pilot losses reach unsustainable levels. Aircraft production, while remaining surprisingly high despite intensive Allied strategic bombing of German industry, could not replace losses quickly enough to maintain force strength. Most critically, the training revelations from captured aircraft often served primarily to demoralize rather than inspire, as pilots realized the full extent of their disadvantages. As Allied forces advanced progressively deeper into Germany from multiple directions during early 1945, the Wanderzirkus Rosarius' ability to travel safely to operational bases to conduct demonstrations diminished steadily. Eventually, the program necessarily ceased operations, as the general collapse of German military organization overtook even specialized units like test and evaluation groups that had previously received priority for scarce resources. The ultimate fate of various captured P-51s operated by German forces remains unclear or unknown in several cases due to incomplete records and the chaos of Germany's final collapse. Some captured aircraft were certainly destroyed on the ground during Allied air raids against German airfields that intensified dramatically during 1945. Others may have been deliberately destroyed by retreating German forces to prevent their recapture by rapidly advancing Allied armies. A few possibly survived until war's end and were subsequently recovered by Allied forces advancing into Germany, though detailed records of such specific recoveries remain limited or lost.
For forces that included undertrained conscripts and unwilling forced laborers whose work quality varied dramatically. The Americans were outproducing Germany in quantity, while matching or exceeding German quality in the categories that mattered operationally: reliability, maintainability, and performance where it counted for the strategic mission. This combination of advantages represented exactly what German leadership had insisted was impossible: that American industrial might would produce crude but adequate weapons in vast numbers, while German engineering excellence would maintain qualitative superiority that compensated for quantitative disadvantage. The Mustang demolished that comfortable narrative completely. Here was an American aircraft that matched German fighters in build quality, exceeded them in the performance categories that mattered strategically, and was being produced in numbers that made German production figures look almost quaint by comparison. German engineers examining captured Mustangs couldn't dismiss them as crude or hastily built. The construction quality was consistently high, materials were excellent, and design integration showed sophisticated engineering throughout. The wing structure demonstrated advanced aerodynamic understanding successfully implemented in mass production. The engine installation showed careful attention to cooling, accessibility, and reliability.
The fuel system design enabled remarkable range through thoughtful engineering, rather than simply hanging ever larger tanks on the airframe. Every system German engineers examined spoke to competent design, executed with quality materials and good manufacturing practices, completely contradicting the propaganda narrative they'd been fed for years. Some German test pilots who extensively flew captured P-51Bs through multiple test flights and mock combat engagements developed grudging, professional respect for American engineering prowess despite their position as enemies. They recognized through direct experience that the Mustang represented a coherent, well-integrated design that intelligently prioritized characteristics most valuable for its intended strategic mission of long-range bomber escort. The aircraft deliberately sacrificed some characteristics like sustained turn performance that might have been optimized for pure dogfighting in favor of speed, extraordinary range, and high-altitude performance that enabled it to escort bombers deep into Germany and fight effectively throughout the mission. This represented sound engineering judgment that selected appropriate design compromises to achieve clearly defined mission objectives rather than pursuing theoretical performance maxima that didn't serve actual operational requirements. The Packard V6510-3 Merlin engine that powered Fraser's P-51B and other early production Mustangs represented another critical area where American capabilities exceeded German achievements. The Packard Company successfully manufactured Rolls-Royce Merlin engines under license in the United States, producing many thousands of engines with remarkably consistent quality despite the complexity of the design. The sophisticated two-stage supercharger with intercooler enabled excellent and sustained high-altitude performance that German inline engines could not match, while the engine proved reliable and relatively maintainable under field conditions. German inline engines like the Daimler-Benz DB605 suffered from increasing quality problems during 1944, as severe material shortages forced use of substitute materials and production dispersal to avoid bombing significantly reduced quality control effectiveness. German engines that should have been capable of reliable performance increasingly suffered premature failures, reduced power output, and maintenance difficulties that degraded operational effectiveness. The admission by German test pilots that the Mustang's handling characteristics and overall performance exceeded their expectations represented professional acknowledgement of American engineering achievement and realistic recognition of significant performance gaps German pilots faced in combat operations. This acknowledgement, forced by direct experience rather than propaganda or secondhand intelligence reports, illustrated how confronting uncomfortable realities sometimes requires direct personal experience that cannot be dismissed or explained away through wishful thinking or ideological assumptions. German pilots who flew the Mustang extensively could not honestly dismiss American engineering as crude or unsophisticated. They had experienced firsthand an aircraft that handled beautifully across its flight envelope, performed superbly in the mission profile that mattered strategically, and demonstrated thoughtful, competent design throughout every system. The final year of World War II in Europe witnessed the Luftwaffe's systematic dissolution as an effective fighting force capable of meaningful resistance. Catastrophic pilot losses, severe and worsening fuel shortages, production difficulties caused by Allied bombing, and overwhelming Allied numerical superiority combined to render German air defense increasingly ineffective, regardless of individual pilot skill or courage. The captured aircraft testing program continued operating as long as practically possible, attempting to provide tactical intelligence that might improve German pilot survivability even as strategic outcomes became inevitable and final defeat approached. German pilots who had flown captured Mustangs extensively and understood Allied aircraft capabilities faced the war's end with complex and mixed emotions. Professional pilots appreciated the engineering achievements represented by aircraft like the P-51, even while regretting their service on the losing side of history's most destructive war. Many harbored no illusions about Germany's defeat being anything other than total and unconditional, having witnessed firsthand the overwhelming material advantages Allied forces possessed in every dimension of military power. The experience forced recognition that the war had been lost not because German forces lacked courage or professional competence, but because they faced opponents with superior resources, better equipment in critical categories, more thorough training systems, and advantageous strategic positions that proved decisive. No amount of tactical innovation or individual heroism could overcome the fundamental imbalances in industrial capacity, resource availability, and trained personnel that characterized the conflict during its final years. The knowledge gained through programs like the Wanderzirkus Rosarius proved tactically valuable but strategically insufficient. Understanding exactly how outmatched you are doesn't make you less outmatched, it just makes the reality impossible to deny. Overcome fundamental material and strategic disadvantages of the magnitude Germany faced by 1944. German pilots who flew captured Mustangs gained valuable knowledge about aircraft characteristics and optimal tactics, but that hard-won knowledge primarily confirmed what many already suspected or understood. Allied aircraft possessed significant and decisive performance advantages that German industry and engineering could not match during the war's final years, given resource constraints and strategic circumstances. The technical sophistication of the P-51 Mustang challenged and ultimately demolished German assumptions about American engineering capabilities that had been carefully cultivated by propaganda over years. Official information had portrayed Americans as capable of producing simple, rugged equipment in vast quantities, but fundamentally incapable of sophisticated design requiring engineering excellence. The Mustang demonstrated conclusively that American engineers could create highly refined, efficient designs that matched or exceeded German capabilities in areas that mattered strategically. The wing design represented advanced aerodynamic research successfully implemented in high-volume production. The Packard V1650-3 Merlin engine demonstrated American capability to manufacture complex high-performance engines in large quantities with consistent quality. The aircraft's systems integration reflected sophisticated engineering that successfully balanced multiple competing requirements to create a coherent, effective weapon system optimized for its intended mission. The strategic air campaign over Germany succeeded in large part, specifically because of the P-51 Mustang's unique combination of capabilities that other aircraft could not match during the critical period of 1944 and early 1945. Long-range bomber escort deep into Germany remained operationally infeasible until the Mustang arrived in substantial quantities and began flying operational missions. Previous Allied escort fighters, despite their considerable capabilities in other areas, possessed insufficient range to accompany heavy bombers throughout complete missions to targets deep inside Germany and back to bases in England. This critical limitation had allowed German fighters to wait until escorts reached fuel limits and turned back before attacking bomber formations during the most dangerous mission segments, resulting in unsustainable bomber losses that forced temporary suspension of deep penetration raids and gave German leadership hope that the strategic bombing campaign might yet be defeated through attrition. The Mustang fundamentally transformed this operational calculus by providing continuous, effective fighter coverage throughout entire missions, regardless of target distance, England to targets deep in Germany and back to England without leaving bomber formations vulnerable at any point. German fighters could no longer find extended periods when bombers flew without protective escorts, forcing German pilots to engage American fighters directly throughout every bombing mission rather than simply attacking bombers during vulnerable windows. This operational reality, combined with growing Allied numerical superiority and declining German pilot quality due to catastrophic attrition and reduced training time, made bomber operations over Germany operationally sustainable for the Allies, while German interception attempts became increasingly costly, ineffective, and ultimately futile. The strategic bombing campaign that had seemed potentially containable in early 1943 became inexorable by late 1944, and the Mustang represented the key technological enabler that made that transformation possible. Provided German pilots with realistic knowledge of what they faced, which theoretically improved their tactical decision-making and survivability, even as it simultaneously revealed the hopelessness of their strategic situation. The program represented a tension between tactical professionalism and strategic desperation, doing everything possible to improve pilot effectiveness while understanding that individual effectiveness couldn't alter inevitable outcomes. Fraser's Mustang and others like it that fell into German hands served as unwitting ambassadors of American industrial and engineering capability, forcing German pilots and engineers to confront realities that contradicted years of official narrative. These captured aircraft demonstrated through direct, undeniable evidence that American engineering could produce sophisticated, high-performance weapon systems in vast quantities with consistent quality, exactly the combination German leadership had insisted was impossible. The experience of German test pilots systematically evaluating these aircraft and gradually comprehending the full extent of Allied advantages paralleled the broader German experience during the war's final years, as comfortable assumptions about inherent superiority gave way to recognition of decisive Allied advantages across multiple dimensions of military capability. The P-51 Mustang represented more than just an excellent fighter aircraft. It embodied a fundamental shift in the balance of technological and industrial capability between the United States and Germany. American engineers had successfully created a weapon system that achieved the specific performance characteristics required for strategic success in the European air war, and American industry had demonstrated the capability to produce this sophisticated aircraft in numbers that overwhelmed German production capacity. The combination proved decisive in achieving air superiority over Germany, enabling the strategic bombing campaign that systematically destroyed German industrial capacity and transportation infrastructure, ultimately making continued resistance impossible regardless of tactical innovation or individual heroism. The story of captured Mustangs in German service provides a unique window into how professional military personnel confronted this uncomfortable reality through direct experience, gaining knowledge that proved tactically valuable but strategically insufficient to alter inevitable outcomes. The revelation German pilots experienced when flying Fraser's Mustang and others like it represented a microcosm of the broader recognition that swept through German military circles during 1944 and 1945. The war was lost, not because German forces lacked courage or skill, but because they faced opponents with overwhelming advantages in the resources, technology, and industrial capacity that ultimately determined modern warfare's outcome.